Hello there, join me today in this flip through of my recently completed sketchbook devoted entirely to animal illustration. I'll walk you through its pages and show you my work. We'll talk about what I learned along the way, including which supplies I really love and will take forward into my next sketchbook. Also, I'm going to share the lessons that I learned that helped me make a decision about where I want to take my work and future sketchbooks next. First of all, let's start with what sketchbook I'm using. This is an A4 moleskine sketchbook as opposed to their watercolour sketchbooks. These have 96 pages of ivory toned paper, which is very smooth with very little tooth indeed. It's only 165 GSM, and whilst it's fantastic for drawing media and more dry media, it's utter rubbish for things like watercolour and gouache. You simply can't take a wet wash of paint and swipe it across the page and hope for success, I'm afraid. I knew when choosing it that the paper wasn't going to be fantastic for things like watercolour, which is usually a preferred medium of mine. However, I really wanted to give it a go and I couldn't resist a bargain, as this particular sketchbook was only £13. And when I had a look today on Amazon, for example, they're charging £31 for the exact same sketchbook. The reason I got it so cheap is I happened to have a look on Amazon Warehouse at the right time, and I got mine reduced because there was a dent on the back cover. When I say a dent, there's a little chip out of one side that, quite frankly, I would have done myself after taking it out of the house once or twice. To ease myself back into illustration, I followed some tutorials on Becca Hall's Patreon all about animal illustration before moving on to this challenge, which is Dogs in August, a daily drawing Instagram challenge where you take on a different dog breed in a style of your choice each day. Unfortunately, on day 18, I slipped and fell and broke my wrist and ended up having emergency surgery instead of completing day 19, which was Basset Hound. I did subsequently do this many weeks later with my left hand, as my right hand was a swollen sausage for many months. But I digress. So these images I've sourced now are from Friends Pets, from royalty free sites, and also from my own images taken while spotting animals in wildlife reserves and just out and about in general. Obviously, I don't meet too many zebras and tigers in Southport, but I do meet a lot of cats and dogs and birds, and try to snap as many images as I can so that I've got a ready source of inspiration that I don't have to worry about attribution and intellectual property rights when I use. A number of years ago, a friend of mine looked at an image I'd drawn of an animal, and to be honest, I can't remember exactly what it was, but she said how great it was and that I'd make a really good children's book illustrator. And to be honest, at the time, I was actually quite offended, and I felt like illustration was somehow childish and a lesser art form than fine art. And I just dismissed it and didn't think about it again. Now, fast forward a number of years, I've rediscovered the absolute joy and pleasure of illustration. There's something about the whimsical nature of it, creating characters and breathing life into a page just by mark making and colour choices, that really brings me joy. I've since come to appreciate just how much skill is required to render a subject simply, expressively, and with just the right amount of realism to be believable to the viewer that's required in illustration. And I don't regard it as a lesser art form, and actually I'm really quite humbled in completing this sketchbook, as I've realised that it simply isn't as easy as you think to make something that on a quick glance looks quite naive and childish actually a worthy piece of art in its own right. I actively stepped away from looking at a sketchbook as a finished piece of art in its own right, and instead think of them as project books, as that removes the pressure and barrier to creating in the first place. It's all about asking questions for me and answering them through your choice of media and paper. It's all about creative problem solving by mark making and using bold colour choices and composition devices to get the message across that you're trying to achieve. Basically, I think it's really difficult to get to where you want to be, to the good stuff, the art you're really proud of and that you want to share with the world, if you don't make some poor decisions, shall we say. And I like to think about using my stash of paper and art supplies as an investment in my future skills. So for me, it's never a waste to use that expensive paper or that really exclusive pigment. It's all about using a tool to share a message and not something that you need to feel restrained by. So a sketchbook should be a playful place, and I think that this sketchbook is really playful. The characters are full of life, and I really enjoyed creating it. And as I went through the pages, I found myself completing them quicker and quicker, because I was learning from each illustration and taking forward into the next page things that worked well and leaving behind the things that I really didn't like. The really welcome side effect of completing over 100 illustrations is that you get to play with a lot of media and develop some opinions about the ones that you really, really like to use and that give you the results you're striving to get. And I'd like to share some of mine from this one sketchbook. I like to reserve the last few pages of any sketchbook as swatching space where I can try out new media and see how they react on the paper that I'm using. This one has lots of different swatches, and actually some of these supplies I went on to sell on eBay secondhand, as I just wasn't finding joy with them, but there are some that I absolutely loved. Now, please don't be completely overwhelmed by this rather extra spread of art supplies I have before us. I'm not going to talk about all of these. In fact, I'm only going to pick out half a dozen things that I really love to talk about, and save the rest for another day. So the first thing that I wanted to share is this Echelina brush pen. Now, it is the rosy beige. It's a water-based watercolour felt tip pen, and it has a, as the name says, a rosy beige tint. And the thing that is really nice about it is that the colour is very similar, if a little bit warmer, to that what you see on the cap here. And you can lay down a lovely base for your animals just by making some simple geometric marks on your page. And there's enough there to give you guidance about where to put subsequent layers, but it's not so richly pigmented that it can't be covered up if you so choose it to be. So this is my saviour. I go back to this when I really want to get started and haven't got time to wait for paint to dry. So Echelina brush pen 347, pink beige or rosy beige. The next thing that I've come to love, and to be honest that I've loved for a long time, is my Jinhao Fude Nib fountain pen. Now if I just take the lid off carefully, this is a Japanese style fountain pen. The nib is bent at a 55-degree angle, and that means that if you draw with the back side of the pen you get very, very fine lines similar to a 0.5 fine liner, but if you use the full extent and breadth of that nib you can get some really thick juicy lines, as I think you will have seen with some of my pen illustrations in this sketchbook. This pen is mega cheap. I got it on Amazon, and to be truthful it's horribly balanced. It's really top heavy. It feels really awkward to use in the hand. However, the marks it makes are so lovely that I forgive it its sins. I like to fill that with platinum carbon ink, which is a very black, very matte, waterproof, fountain pen safe ink, which is kind of the holy grail in fountain pen inks for an artist. One tub like this, or jar I should say, will last you an extremely long time. I think I've had this 5 years now and it barely looks like I've touched it, but I get through quite a lot of refills on a regular basis in my Fude pen. My graphite of choice at the moment is this big chunky Faber-Castell Jumbo 6B pencil. They do them in softer and harder versions, but I really like that big chunky nib to make some brave marks with, shall we say. It's really soft, so it's easy to push around the page. You can soften it nicely with a paper tortillon, and it gives a really nice dark outline that's very handy when you're doing figurative sketches or life drawing. So yes, for me, the softer the better. I love 6Bs, 8B pencils in general. The 3 coloured pencils that I wanted to draw attention to are 3 from totally different ranges. The first one is this Derwent Lightfast Nightshade, and this one has a rich purple colour, which is more vibrant than the colour on the cap of the pencil. But it is very dark in value, so it's fabulous for outlines, particularly on yellowish subjects, like the lions and also the elephants that we saw in my sketchbook, as it gives that complementary colour effect with the yellow. I love this. I use it as my dark tone for many pieces. Similarly, I use the Faber-Castell Polychromos, which is an oil-based coloured pencil as opposed to wax-based, which one of the others I'm going to talk about is. This is the Dark Sepia 175, and it is a dark greyish, brownish, not quite blackish tone, and as you can imagine, it's really good for getting dark values with. The nib can be sharpened to an extremely fine point, so if you're looking for tiny little details like the dot eyes I prefer, whiskers or shaggy fur, this pencil is brilliant. It's just dark enough to give you a bold outline should you want it, but it's not so flat and black as, say, the platinum carbon ink, that it's going to deaden down any areas that you want to be really dark. So this is one I will replace when it wears out. And the final pencil, as you can see, is really well loved. You'll have to believe me when I tell you this is a Derwent Colour Soft pencil, as I've sharpened it so much that there's very little left. And as the name says, it is very soft. This is a mid to dark grey, akin to a Payne's grey but lighter in value. This particular one is Persian grey, and I think that says C660 or 460, I'm not sure. It's almost fully worn off. These pencils are very cheap. They are very soft, similar to a Caran d'Ache Luminance. If anything, I would say they are softer. I know that means that a lot of people don't love them, but the tone is so perfect. I use it in so many different subjects that this pencil I would happily buy half a dozen of at a time, just to make sure that I never run out of it. Next up on my list, I want to show you some of my watercolours. This is a folio palette by Art Toolkit, and we're not going to talk about all the colours because that would be quite ridiculous. Oh, A up, one of my greens has escaped. It must know I'm about to talk about it. There we go. Right, so what we've got here are 4 greens that I use a lot with the natural subjects that I'm painting, and in particular as I've gone on to add more and more backgrounds where there's leaves and foliage and flowers, these greens are more and more useful. I'll show you my swatch card so you can see the names. All 4 of them here are by Daniel Smith. We have Serpentine Genuine, Green Apatite Genuine, Jadeite Green and Perylene Green. These are mostly super granulation, Primatech colours, so they are the more expensive ones. However, a little goes a long way, and in particular the Green Apatite Genuine, you can't see it on this very smooth hot press paper that I've used, but on a colder press paper you'll find that it spreads out and the pigments separate into this beautiful rusty orange and a deep leafy green that is really wonderful for autumn scenes in particular. So these guys are absolutely essential for getting my foliage, and when I switch to a sketchbook that accepts watercolour more, I'm certainly going to be dipping into this palette a lot more in future. The final paint that I want to show you is in this dinky little palette. This is something I got cheap as chips online. I can't even remember where from, to be honest. It's airtight, and I have a limited palette of gouache paints, and all of them, apart from this one, which is a Schminke Horadam, I think it's a gold ochre. All the rest are Winsor & Newton. We've got Windsor Red, Quin Rose, Ultramarine, Burnt Sienna, Lemon Yellow, the Gold Ochre, Cobalt Teal. That one is Perylene Green, which I use in place of black. Cadmium Free Yellow, and the little lumps there are Prussian Blue with, of course, a nice big blob of white. Now, you don't need all of these colours, but I do find it's helpful to have a warm and a cool option of each of the primaries. It's difficult to mix a turquoise or a teal, so it's handy to have that on its own. And also an earthy yellow is indispensable for natural subjects like animals and foliage. Like I said, the Perylene Green is my darkest tone on the palette, and I love the mixes it makes with all the yellows, and adding a little bit of burnt umber, or even some of the Prussian Blue can give you a super dark value in place of black. And talking about paint, it wouldn't be complete without a paintbrush. Now, I save my watercolour brushes for when I'm doing a purely watercolour based piece. So for mixed media, I like to use cheaper synthetic brushes such as this size 10 fill bit, so rounded synthetic brush by Craft Ammo. I got a set for Christmas a number of years ago, and as you can see, it looks almost brand new. It carries some but not too much water and pigment, so it's great for the lighter weights of papers such as the moleskine that I have been using, where you really can't get away with doing big wet washes and wet technique. That's totally off the cards with that sketchbook, but you can swipe over some single pass washes of more concentrated pigment with success. I mentioned at the start of the video that I wanted to take forward the lessons I learned from this sketchbook into my next one, and whilst I've loved using this sketchbook, and there's a lot of work that I'm really happy with, such as the pen and ink illustrations, and then later on where I've started playing a bit more with gouache, with sort of quite pigmented, low water containing washes, and mixing in colour pencil. I want to focus on firstly continuing practice so that I get the form of my animals nicely, and to do that I have chosen an A3 Royal Talons book. This one I'm going to reserve purely for pen and ink or pencil sketches. It's the Royal Talons art creations brand that's super popular on social media amongst artists. This one, like the moleskine, has ivory paper that is very smooth. There's absolutely no tooth on it. I believe this is 140 GSM, so it's even thinner than the moleskine, and there are 80 pages, I want to say, in it. So this one I'm going to reserve for pen and ink and pencil sketches, and it's where I'm going to practice my drawing basics, shape and form, so that the animals that I go on to illustrate actually look like the animal that they're meant to. The sketchbook that I'm going to be more playful in though, and explore more colour, composition, and just generally get a bit heavier into mixed media with, is this Pith sketchbook. You can see it has a little fabric tag on the side, with a case bound open spine on it that's super trendy, but has the function that it lays completely flat. This size is just a little bit, maybe 1 or 2 centimeters bigger than A4, so it's slightly larger than A3 when you open up a full spread. This has off-white paper, so it's not quite as creamy as the Royal Talons or the moleskin, but it is considerably thicker. This is 200 GSM and it is getting closer to that cardstock sort of feel in a sketchbook. And I am told from their website and other creators who love pith that they accept media well. Again, they're not fantastic with the wettest of medias, but I'm hopeful from what I've seen with other creators that I'll be able to use more layers, a bit more gouache, a bit more watercolour, and also add in things like acrylic markers, oil and soft pastels as well. That's all for this video. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed and I'll see you again soon.